Okay, so let's assume you have several data sets. Specifically, you have been recording data on several trials in whatever experiment you're doing, and you end up with, as I mentioned, a couple of sets of data. So here we have two columns of data, and they're supposedly representative of various trials of a single experiment. And the goal that you have is to represent the mean or average of these trials along with the statistical representation error bars of standard deviation, because when you start applying your statistical calculations to your data, you can start telling a much more robust story about the trends in your data, how reliable your data is, all that type of stuff. Okay, but how do you do that in Excel? Well, Excel is an extraordinarily powerful program that can help you do that, and it's not difficult. If you set your data up in columns, each one of these numbers in each column represents another trial of a certain experiment, for example, but you do it in a column. It is a very easy process. Okay, and one common theme I want to let you know is that the data is what's important. All of the graphical analysis and error bars and anything you're going to do comes from the data. So if you make a mistake on the graph, just delete it and make a new one. The data is what you want to protect. Okay, so let's get started. Excel has literally a zillion formulas built into the program, and they're all very helpful, most of which you will never use. But up here, when you highlight a cell, this is where you would enter the data. You can enter directly in the cell, but if you're going to want to calculate the mean or the average of this column of data, in Excel, any formula or function is preceded by an equal sign, and that tells it that you're going to be doing some type of function calculation. Okay, and the one that I'm going to start off with is average. Okay, and that is a built-in function in Excel. If I go up to the top and I say insert and I go function, I'll drag this over here, this help menu, you're going to get a list of, and by the way, it's searchable. So average, oh, there it is right there. And you can put in a standard, okay, oh, standardized. What about standard deviation? It doesn't show that. Let's try. That one's a little bit less. Anyway, STDEV is the one we're talking about. This is the standard deviation. Okay, but all of these functions are built into Excel, and they have they're all done categorically, so you can search them out. But the two for this video, first one is average, and then you're going to insert your parentheses, and now you simply have to highlight the column of data, right, and then end with a closed parentheses and hit enter, and it will calculate the mean or average of this series of data. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to go equals average. I'm going to highlight the data, and I'm going to close the parentheses and hit enter. So now these two numbers represent the average of these two sets of data. Now again, your graph, your column chart will basically, you're not going to graph these trials. You're going to graph just these two numbers. So let's do that. But before we do that, let's go ahead and calculate our standard deviation. How far do the values deviate? Okay, and so very much the same as I did average, I'm going to go up here, and it's kind of important you keep it in the same column, and you'll see why. Equals STDEV, and once again, highlight the data, close parentheses, and enter. Here, same thing, equals STDEV, parentheses, highlight your data, close parentheses, enter. And so now you have two, okay, now you have two data sets, okay, and notice the values here are widely dispersed between 2 and 5, all right, so there's a wide spread, and so you have a larger standard deviation, 1.2. Here, all of the values are either 5, 6, or 7, and so you have a much lower standard deviation at 0.7, so that makes sense. So now that I have my calculations done, it's time to make the graph. Highlight these two cells. I'm going to go up here to Column Chart. Okay, and you're just going to click your standard first option. You will format this however you wish. The first thing to do is to format the graph however you want. Okay, and that is up here in this menu. You can choose any style you wish. All right, I think it's important to pick one that is appropriate to what your teachers are requesting. And usually it's something like this, where you're going to have a legend, you're going to have the titles on the axes, you're going to have a chart title. So let's assume that this is what you want. Okay, and notice you can choose anything. All right, the data, the background, the actual titles, all right, and you can modify them any way you wish. Okay, do this first. Figure out how that's going to look first. Then you're going to worry about your error bars. Once it's all done, now let's go to the error bars. You simply highlight the data. Actually, you're going to click it twice. Watch what happens when I do that. 1, 2. You get a menu that pops up, and oddly enough, error bars is one of the choices. Okay. My recommendation is you're going to select under the display part. You want both top and bottom, all right, and you want caps on them. And that's the standard way you're going to see error bars appear in scientific literature. So I would click this one and this one. Now you're going to see a fixed value. That's not what you want. What you want down here is custom. Why? Because you just did your own custom calculation for standard deviation. You don't want a fixed value. And now since you click custom, you're going to specify what value do you want. All right. And now you're going to get custom error bars for positive and negative. Well, it's going to be the same. All right. And the way to deal with this is you simply come over here and you select the range of data for positive. And what's that range? Well, it's right here. It's these two numbers are going to be, this is the positive for this column, the positive for this column. And since you kept them in the same column, Excel knows that this number is associated with this data set and this number is associated with this data set. Very clever. So once you've selected those two numbers, enter. Now for the negative error value. Okay, going to do the same thing. Highlight the same two numbers, enter, and OK. Click OK. And now what we have here is we have the two columns, one with, they both have the error bars. One has a much larger standard deviation, and that makes sense. Remember, this column of data had a larger standard deviation. And this column of data had a much lower standard deviation, as you can see by the error bars there. Okay, I think that if you do the error bars first and then do the formatting of the graph, the error bars go away. And so that is why I think it's important to do all of your titles and axes and everything else first, then do your error bars. All right, and that is all you need to know.